Okay. Streaming, recording. Make sure the stream comes up. There's always a delay here. There it is. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome also to the many who are attending this satsang online. We have a lot of great questions, again, both from our online viewers and from our local audience. We'll go back and forth, as always, and as always, we have more questions than we'll be able to get through today, so I apologize in advance if I don't get to your question. First question from Prashanto in Bangladesh. Every time we get Prashanto has asked questions in the past, every time I just think about the difficulties going on in Bangladesh right now. Many of you know that with the change of government, Hindus are more subject now to discrimination and other problems. So it might be a difficult time for Hindus living in Bangladesh. And Prashanto's question is can I get enlightened just by watching and following your spiritual wisdom on YouTube? And set me aside. Suppose the most brilliant teacher of Advaita Vedanta who ever lived is on YouTube. You go to his channel, his or her channel, and watch all the videos. And so can you become enlightened by watching the best possible teachings of Advaita Vedanta available on YouTube? The answer is no, but not for the reason you think. Enlightenment is not the result of listening to your guru. How about that? It's not. You can listen to your guru, whoever he or she is, no matter how brilliant they are. You can listen for days and weeks and months and years, and you can remain utterly unchanged. It's not a matter of listening or watching. It's a matter of being engaged in a process of Atma Vichara, self-inquiry. So the words and teachings of the Guru are meant to guide you on that process of Atma Vichara. It's through Atma Vichara that you get enlightened. Notice that you have to do in American English, they say you have to do the heavy lifting. You have to do the work. No Guru, no matter how spectacular they are, no one can make you enlightened. You have to see and discover for yourself. So that's a good question. Next is from Om Prakash, who lives in Texas. When someone's hand is wounded and bleeding, how can he say he is not affected? And that word affected is a word that Om Prakash and all of you have heard me use that word many times. And I said that an enlightened person experiences pain, but is not affected by that pain. Now, if your hand is bleeding, does that affect the hand? Undeniably, it's bleeding. Does the pain in your hand affect the mind? You feel the pain. It's registered in your mind, nowhere else. And that's true equally for you and an enlightened person. The hand is affected. The mind is affected. Yet, we say the enlightened person is not affected. Of course, the enlightened person is one who has discovered, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I am pure consciousness. I am a conscious being, independent of the body and mind. The bleeding wound belongs to the hand, the pain belongs to the mind, and I am the sakshi, the uninvolved observer of both. And as an uninvolved observer, I'm affected by neither. Now, Om Prakash goes on to say, I thought discerning the body with Atma in this situation is not practical. So here, take the case of the enlightened person who's not affected by the wound of the hand and the pain in the mind. But does that mean the enlightened person is going to just ignore it? What would prevent the enlightened person from taking care of the problem? There's no reason not to. So the enlightened person will get treatment for the wound and maybe take Tylenol for the pain. And absolutely, the enlightened person will respond pragmatically to the situation without being affected by it. Without being affected means your sense of contentment, your sense of being okay, is never disturbed. Usually when you get a bleeding wound, you don't feel so okay at that moment. An enlightened person would say, okay, better deal with it. But without all the emotional tumult that seems to come along with injuries and so forth. Next question from Cody. Why am I that Atma and not this body, mind, and intellect? Why am I, and I'll paraphrase, why am I Satchitananda Atma, consciousness, pure consciousness? Why am I not the body, mind, and intellect? Well, there's several ways of approaching this. First of all, why am I? So I, who is asking the question? This is a good place to start. Who's asking this question? Does your body say, who am I? No. Does your mind or intellect say, who am I? Please note that they are instruments. Don't instruments have to be wielded by someone? Like your body is an instrument. It's wielded by you. Your mind and intellect are instruments wielded by you. Who is that you? Well, that's what Vedanta is all about. It's a simple question, so in very simple language, you are a conscious being. When you say, why am I Atma and not body, mind, and intellect? Because the one who asks this question is a conscious being. The one who asks this question is not a tool in the form of body, is not a tool in the form of mind or intellect. The one who asks this question is a conscious being, and the one who suffers, the one who says, I suffer. Again, body doesn't say I suffer. Mind and intellect are instruments. So whoever says, I suffer, it is that conscious being that is addressed through the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Oh, this is nice. This is from Jay in New York, who says, why doesn't Hinduism have a central organization to define doctrine and settle theological disputes, similar to something like the Roman Catholic Church? Well, actually, if you study the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy through the centuries, the Pope is the head of the church, you'll find that that having that organization in some ways is a blessing, but in many, many ways is a curse. And we all know the fact that organizations come with their own problems. Anytime you organize, any organizations have, anyway, not time to go into a big discussion about that. Let me say, what is the alternative? Before that, there's a joke that everyone tells. I should tell you the joke. And the Christians say that Christianity is the world's greatest organized religion, and Hindus respond by saying Hinduism is the world's greatest disorganized religion. And there's a lot of merit in that expression, because in the Hindu tradition you have freedom to practice religion in your own way. There's no one right way. There's no wrong way. There are ways that are more helpful. There are ways that are less helpful. And there are ways that are counterproductive. All of that is still true. But there's no central organization saying do this and don't do that. There are Hindu organizations, and they do say do this and do that, but they are not central organizations, which means to say that they're organizations associated with a certain religious or spiritual tradition, and their authority is accepted by their followers only, not by others. So for the followers, if they're following that particular tradition, then whatever the organization says is right or wrong, then they will follow that. They also have the freedom just to say, well, I don't want to follow this. I'm going to leave this particular tradition and do something else. So this is to illustrate my point that the absence of organization in the Hindu tradition is really a blessing and avoids many of the problems associated with central organizations. Now, so since Hinduism doesn't have a central organization, then what is it that determines doctrine, and what is it that resolves theological disputes? Well, instead of doing it in an organization, it's done in a scholarly manner. And that is, scholars will write commentaries on a text. For example, on the Bhagavad Gita. Then some people will interpret it one way, some people will interpret another. A very obvious example, Shankaracharya interprets it in a very Advaitic manner, but there are many other groups that will interpret the Bhagavad Gita in a dualistic manner. So then, how to resolve that theological dispute? Write a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita that establishes your perspective. And it will be a scholarly commentary in the Sanskrit language. And just to be able to write good Sanskrit means you already have to be a pretty good scholar. It's not easy to compose in Sanskrit. So if you disagree with Shankara's interpretation, you write your own commentary explaining why you think Shankara is wrong and why you're right. Of course, then what happens is one of the followers of Shankara, having read your commentary, will then write his or her own commentary refuting your commentary. So there's a commentary which is refuted by another commentary, and you can imagine where this goes through the ages. And notice it's not definitive. It's not meant to be definitive, because ultimately it's up to you. The value of these spiritual teachings, I don't think I've ever made this statement before. Let's see if it works for you. The value of an interpretation of a spiritual text, Hindu text. So we're talking about doctrine and resolving theological disputes. What I would suggest is the value of a particular text lies less in its interpretation and more on whether or not it helps you in your spiritual growth. Which means it's not a matter of being right or wrong. What's the right interpretation? Who cares? I would say if you are a true spiritual seeker, it's not about being right or being wrong. It's about what works, what leads you forward on your journey of spiritual growth. You know, so many people are fixated on being right or following the right sampradaya, the right spiritual tradition. Which one is right? Is Shankara right? Is Ramanuja right? Is Madhva right? Who's right? Who's wrong? Someone who has that perspective, I think, is on the wrong track. Because it's, as I said, it's not about being right, it's not about being wrong, but instead it's about what tradition is most effective, what teachings are or which interpretation are most effective for you as an individual to lead you forward on your process, on your path of spiritual growth. I think that's a very important observation. Okay, do we have some questions here? A question in back. You'll need the microphone.
I have a question about devotion. You spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. Devotion is generally understood to be to have the goal of reducing suffering and leading to moksha after death, and is practiced with rituals and prayers.
Mm-hmm.
However, Advaita also says devotion as a means for its goal, which is understanding self as Brahman. Shankaracharya himself has composed many krutis for devotees.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how, if devotion is about rituals and prayers, how can it lead one for that self-realization as Atman?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there something more than rituals and prayers needed to achieve the goal of the guru?
Very good. Good question. Is devotion alone sufficient to gain moksha? The answer depends on who you ask. Because if you ask Madhvacharya, the founder of a dualistic interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures, he would say, of course he's 800 years ago, so he's not here to ask today, but 800 years ago he would have said, devotion is self-sufficient. Other teachers would, Ramanuja, more or less, would also say the same thing. So it depends on who you ask. Obviously, if you ask Shankaracharya, you correctly understood that Shankara says moksha is a result of discovering your true nature as Satchitananda Atma, which is Brahman. You become enlightened, and being enlightened is moksha. Now, there's one, then we say, well, how can we possibly reconcile such different interpretations of scriptures? You said something which was very important, very revealing, and that is the spiritual traditions that say devotion alone is sufficient for moksha. How do they define moksha? They define moksha as a condition after your death. Shankaracharya says devotion is not sufficient for moksha. How does Shankara define moksha? He says, right now, to be liberated, to be free from suffering right now. So maybe one way of reconciling these two different perspectives is devotion alone sufficient, or do you need something more? To use your words, and Shankara would fall in that category. Shankara would say that these devotional practices prepare you for that process of self-inquiry, a process in which you realize your true nature and you become enlightened, of course, with the help of scripture and guru. So maybe we can reconcile these very different perspectives by saying the devotional traditions that say devotion, the spiritual traditions that say devotion alone is sufficient, they say that based on their definition of moksha. So if what you want is a condition of blessedness, if I can use that word, a condition of blessedness after you die, if that is your goal, then, according to these traditions, then devotion is absolutely enough. And I think that I would be, even though I'm an Advaitin, I would agree with that. If your goal is to merge with Bhagavan after you die, or how's this? If this is, by the way, this is Madhva's teachings as interpreted by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If your goal is after you die, you go to a celestial Vrindavana, not the one in UP. This one, Uparwala. You go to this celestial Vrindavana, and you get to be a gopi in Vrindavana, and run around after Krishna, or run around as he's chasing you. If that is, and this is how the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition interprets the teachings of Madhva, this dualistic tradition, if that's your goal, you absolutely don't need Advaita Vedanta. Absolutely not. What for? You don't need Shankara, you don't need all this complex stuff. If that's what you want, devotion alone is indeed self-sufficient. On the other hand, if you say, I am suffering, and I want to be free from suffering now. I can't wait till I die. I want freedom from suffering right now. If that is your goal, then absolutely devotional practices alone are not sufficient. Because no matter how devoted you are, you will still experience pain, sadness, various kinds of suffering. So I think, does this answer your question?
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, other questions? Yes.
I want to ask a question about your answer to another question earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So the other question was, why am I not this body
Mm-hmm.
or the mind?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I Satchitananda?
Mm-hmm.
And your answer was, you asked by asking the question, who is asking?
Mm-hmm.
But you implied who is asking, the person who is asking
Mm-hmm.
is really Atman. I think so.
Not that simple, but go ahead.
But yeah, my
I used the term conscious being.
conscious being.
Mm-hmm.
But but to frame the question, who is asking,
Mm-hmm.
use the intellect,
It's a tool.
the mind.
Used by whom?
I think it's, but Satchitananda doesn't need to ask that question.
Correct.
That question is never asked by Atman itself.
Correct.
So I would, I thought maybe it is me truly, me in the sense, the mind and the intellect, that's asking the question. I could be wrong.
But the mind and intellect are tools. So does a hammer have an agenda? Is it?
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
The questioners can't be heard online. I don't know if the microphone is off or not. Can't hear the question.
None of the questions? Oh, I don't know why. Give me the microphone, please. Okay, I will. It's off now. Maybe we ran out of batteries. No? There it is. Did I forget? It was working before. Anyway, I apologize. Thank you. So I apologize to our online viewers who couldn't hear the questions. We just found there was a problem with the mic. The problem with the mic was me. I forgot. I didn't turn it on. So the question we just heard was was about the prior question when we say, am I pure consciousness or am I body, mind, and intellect? And I suggested at that time that the way to answer that question is find out who's asking the question. And this is where it gets more complicated because it turns out it's a very simple question, but on analysis, it's really complicated. And let me show you the complication. You correctly said, and our online viewers didn't hear it, you correctly said that consciousness doesn't ask questions. Correct. Absolutely correct. Obviously, your body doesn't ask questions. Your mind is an instrument, it doesn't ask questions. Your intellect is an instrument, it doesn't ask questions. Then who asks the question? Exactly. It's complicated. And this is what Vedanta deals with in a very elaborate way, explaining that question. Who asks the question? And this is not the right time or place for a 2-hour lecture, which would be required to say that. But in order to understand that, we have to understand, first of all, the relationship between consciousness and mind. Further, we have to understand the nature of I, which has different meanings in different contexts. Look at the problem with the word I. It's a favorite topic of mine, actually. The I is a pronoun. In Sanskrit, they call sarvanama. It is a word that represents everything and anything. So, if I say, I am 71 years old, what does that I refer to? Body, right? If I say, I am awake and energetic, who does that refer to? That prana. So I'm kind of taking you through this panchakosha thing. So that's a reference to the life force in my body. If I say I feel calm, I'm referring to my mind. If I say I'm thinking very hard about your question, that's a reference to intellect. And if I say, last night in deep sleep, I felt wonderful, that's actually a reference to the Anandamaya Kosha, for those of you who know the technicalities of it. So notice this word I is very slippery in a manner of speaking, because it has different meanings in different contexts. And then to make things even more complicated, then Vedanta says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Well, wait a minute. Body is not Brahman, prana is not Brahman, mind and intellect are not Brahman. Then how can you say there's yet another meaning for I? And we're not done yet. Because the answer to the question comes with the recognition of an entity which is a false I, a mental activity that says I, the I thought, the I sense, the sense of I-ness. In English, we often use the word ego to refer to it, not in a sense of pride, but in a fundamental sense. In Sanskrit, we call this one ahankara. That, and by the way, ahankara literally means, set pride aside, it means in this context that which gives rise to the sense of I-ness. It is a mental construct. So in addition to all the other I's, so we had 5 I's from the standpoint of the five I's. I have to distinguish what I's we're talking about here. So with regard to the so-called panchakosha model or description of an individual, I can refer to your body, to the life force, to your mind, intellect, and to ananda that you experience in deep sleep. So we have 5 different kinds of I there. Then we have the I of Vedanta, aham brahma, asmi. And then we have one more. Actually, we have many more, but just this is a simplified description. By the way, when I said many more, there's no end. When you say, I am a son or daughter, wow. Are you referring to your body? Not quite, right? It's a role relationship. When you say, I am a doctor or engineer, that's another one. When you say, I am ecologically aware. What is that? The point I'm making is there's no end to the number of definitions we come up with I. And there's no end because in your mind is a false I who takes on all these identities. That false I is the one who utters the word I. Ahankara is the agent who pronounces the word I. And that ahankara then can say, I am this, I am that, I am this, I am that, I am that. So I'm going to stop here because I'm just giving you a hint how complex that question is. So you can either give a very elaborate description, which I'm just hinting at, or Shankara has a nice way of doing it in one of his commentaries. He is saying, who is that I? And he answers with one word. The question is, who is that I? And or actually the context is a little different. To whom does ignorance belong? It's a little bit technical. So let me paraphrase it. Who is that I? And Shankara says that I-ness is, he gives that one word, pritchuhu, whoever, it means the asker, the one who is asking. So whoever is asking, who am I? That one is this false I. Yeah. Anyway, like I said, quite complex when you get into it. Let's continue here online. This question comes from Vikas, who lives in Netherlands. And Vikas says, I am practicing meditation regularly for the last few years. I reach a point where I can stop all the thoughts popping up in my mind, which means mind becomes silent. However, I am always aware of the state of my mind. I am aware that there are no thoughts popping up in my mind. That's one state of meditation. There are many, many such states. This is one of many. When you are meditating, and you reach a point where you understand you reach a point which can be described like this. I am aware that there are of the absence of thoughts popping up in my mind, or to use other words, I am aware of silence in my mind. Good. So, and it says, which can be another form of sukshma vichara. I don't think that's helpful. A subtle thought. It's not a thought. If it's a thought, then you say, oh, the words come. I am aware of this. It's a wordless observation. What's happening is, in that condition, you are present as consciousness. Your mind is present, and there are no thoughts present. And significantly, this is another complicated question, so let me give a brief answer and then a pointer. The brief answer is, in that condition, when you say, when you feel, so no words, when you feel, I am aware of silence in my mind, who is that I am aware? That I that is aware is ego. Of course, ego can't exist without consciousness. Consciousness is a given. So the ego is still present in this condition. So other thoughts have resolved. Ego has not yet resolved. Vikas goes on, please, how do I get rid of that, how do I go beyond, I'm paraphrasing, how do I go beyond that? How do I get rid of the ego? First of all, what are you trying to achieve in meditation? Is it really necessary to get rid of the ego? What is the goal of your meditation? There's a lot to be considered here. And this is a very, I'm glad Vikas has reached a very profound state of meditation. There can still be a lot further to go. But at this level, we need a tremendous amount of clarity about what's happening and what we're trying to accomplish. And what would be helpful for Vikas or any of you who have questions at this level of meditation is I have a series of videos, The Psychology of Samadhi. It goes very deeply into these topics. I think it's a series of 4 videos. And 4 videos because there's a lot going on at this level. And it really requires some careful thought to understand what's happening. So what's happening is, let me not go further into it. Watch that series of videos. If you have questions like this, that Psychology of Samadhi video series will absolutely address those issues. Next. Vishaka, who lives in Virginia, she asks, I understand I'm not the body or mind, I'm Satchitananda, and so is everyone else. If the body and its suffering are just mithya, notice that expression, just mithya, how can I develop empathy towards everyone? And especially, how can I develop empathy towards someone who considers their suffering to be real? Let's apply an example just to make it more concrete. We had the question before about the bleeding hand, so let's go back to that. Suppose I have a bleeding hand, and you are actually, let me turn it around. Suppose you have a bleeding hand, and I am enlightened. So I see your hand bleeding, and I say, that's your body is mithya, who cares? and you say, but Swamiji, my hand is bleeding. It's okay, it's just mithya. This is not what Vedanta teaches at all. And this is one of the problems with a very common misunderstanding of that word mithya. Because in vernacular languages, it ends up meaning false or useless or empty. And in Vedanta, it's used as a technical term. And the technical term is, in this metaphor, pot is mithya. That's how we use it in Vedanta, which is to say that pot exists dependent on clay. Your bleeding hand exists dependent on Brahman. On the other hand, would you say that it's just a pot? You know, it doesn't really exist, or as many people say, it's all illusion. Is this pot an illusion? This is the common misunderstanding, one of the most common misunderstandings of Advaita Vedanta. This pot is not an illusion. It just doesn't happen to be absolutely real. But it's not an illusion. So in the same way, the bleeding hand is not an illusion. We don't say just mithya and dismiss it like that. It's a bleeding hand. It happens to be not an absolute reality, but it's as real as the pot, which means we accept the empirical reality of everything in the world, and an enlightened person will respond in an empathetic and pragmatic way. And no enlightened person will dismiss, oh, it's all mithya, who cares? In fact, anyone who says that, it's all mithya, who cares? Anyone who says that has just proven they're not enlightened. Honestly. That's not enlightenment. Okay, a couple more. Let's see, this one. Is karma part of a system of morality? We're talking about the doctrine of karma. And definitely the doctrine of karma is connected to a system of morality, dharma. So dharma, we have adharma and dharma. Dharma is that which helps you. Adharma is that which harms. Very simple. But now he's saying, is that an essential part of the doctrine of karma? And he goes on to say, would it be wrong to call the system of karma, to call it divine judgment? And this is a question from Ganesh in San Francisco. And this might be like a personal theory, a pet theory. And it's not uncommon to come up with things like that. But this pet theory is not well considered. Divine judgment. The word judgment, judgment is kind of those of you who speak Hindi and Urdu, please help me out here. What Hindi word would you use for judgment? That's more logic. I bet you would go to some legal term. And I'm out of my depth here because all the legal terms in Hindi are Persian in origin, Urdu, and I don't know that at all. But the whole legal, most of you know this, I don't know this in detail, but the legal language in Hindi is all Urdu words, which means they're not Sanskritic, which means they come from Islam and don't come from Hinduism. It's just a linguistic observation about this word judgment. In English, the word judgment comes from the Bible. And the biblical tradition, which includes Islam, by the way, the biblical tradition is God is the judge. At the end of your life, you will be judged according to your deeds. That's a distinctly non-Hindu concept of judgment at the end of your life. It's very much a biblical view. Karma is not a system of judgment. Karma, the doctrine of karma, is best understood as as cause and effect. Cause and effect. Is there any judgment that, if I drop the pot, does the pot decide whether or not it should fall? Or does the pot look down and say, is that a good place to fall? I would rather fall over there. And the idea of judgment I'm trying to introduce here. No, it's very mechanical. You drop it, it falls. It falls following the laws of nature. And what I'm suggesting is that the doctrine of karma is free from any kind of judgment. It's mechanical. It's cause and effect. Good deeds have good results. Harmful deeds have undesirable results, both now and later. That's just how it works. That is the doctrine of karma. So it's definitely not a system of divine judgment. It's connected to dharma and adharma, but the doctrine of karma in and of itself is simply a doctrine of cause and effect. A further question about the doctrine of karma. How does one defend the doctrine of karma against this argument? And the argument is, why am I being punished for something I did in a prior life that I don't know anything about? This is a very common argument against the doctrine of karma. And it's an argument based on, it seems unfair. Why should I be punished? I don't even remember killing anyone in my past lives. So then why should I have to suffer for it in this life? It seems unfair. First of all, it's absolutely true that in this life you will suffer for deeds according to the doctrine of karma, which you can believe or not believe. As we said, as we've discussed in other classes, the doctrine of karma is neither right nor is it wrong. It is a belief system. It happens to be a very useful and helpful belief system. So if you accept and believe in the doctrine of karma, then definitely it's true that if you murdered someone in a past life, you may pay the price for that adharmic deed in this life. And in that sense, you would be punished. In fact, look, there's another interesting observation. He says punished. Why am I being punished? There again, it's biblical thinking that's seeping into Hindu thought. God, a biblical God rewards you for your good deeds and punishes you for your bad deeds. A biblical God will do that. Ishvara is known as karma phala data, the giver of the fruits of your own actions. Meaning, when you do something good, Ishvara gives you a good result. When you do something not so good, Ishvara gives you the opposite kind of result. Ishvara doesn't even make a judgment. Ishvara impartially gives you the results of your own deeds. You get what you deserve. You get according to your actions. So cause and effect. I'm just pointing out this word punished is more evidence of biblical ideas which has seeped into Hindu thinking. Now, to answer his question about how to respond to that argument, there we go. Why am I being punished? So you're not being punished. Why am I getting this result? So I'm not being punished, first of all. And second, for something I don't even remember in a past life, it looks unfair on the surface. What makes it fair is that it applies to everyone uniformly. If it was only true for you, that among all the people on the planet, only you are suffering for something in a prior life that you don't remember, that would be terribly unfair. But this is true for every single person. So the fairness comes in its universality. I have a bad example for that. And the example is taxes. You might say taxes are unfair. Well, maybe, maybe not, but the fact is taxes don't apply just to you. They apply to everyone. So the fairness comes in the universality. So that's how the doctrine of karma can be better understood. Now, a question from, let's see. How about, yeah, this is good. This is from Maya, who lives in Singapore. How to stop devotional practices from becoming mechanical? Good question. She says, I'm doing puja and chanting out of memory and not meaningfully. That is, doing them mechanically. Okay. First thing that needs to be said is doing puja mechanically is still better than not doing puja. All right? I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but it's a starting point. Because doing puja is an act of devotion, you have enough value to sit down and do that puja. Even if your mind is elsewhere, even if your heart isn't into it, you're still making a significant and meaningful act in your life. You could be doing a million other things, but you've chosen to set all that aside and sit down and do puja, even if it's mechanical. I'm not making an excuse for doing it mechanically, because to do it mechanically means it's much, much, much less effective as a spiritual practice. It's still a spiritual practice. It's still helping you. It will help you in so many ways, but it's like you're getting only this little bit of the benefit of that puja if it's being done mechanically. So when puja becomes mechanical, how to re-infuse it with meaning. And there's no simple answer to that, because it's highly personal. It depends on every individual person. What would work for one person may not work for another. I can just offer some ideas, some suggestions, but there's no one simple answer to that question. How to take a dry, mechanical practice and reinvigorate it. One suggestion I would say is put it aside for a while, but for a distinct period of time, maybe 1 month. And for 1 month, change it. Do a different practice. Maybe do some meditation, do some scriptural reading, some scriptural recitation, chant some stotras. Do something different for 1 month and then return to it. Another possibility is do a different puja. You've been doing the same thing for 15 years. No wonder it becomes mechanical. So do something different. And if you really want to take this a step further, do it differently every day. Why not? There's no rule that says you have to do it exactly like this. And how you do it differently is up to you. As I said, there's no one way of doing it. Another approach is separate from the puja to develop a very real and strong connection with Ishvara. And the way again, it depends on the person, but often the way that's done is by a very, it sounds silly. You share your heart with Ishvara. And in order to do that, you have to use words. And the words you should use should not be some Sanskrit words that you don't understand. How is that sharing your heart? So to share your heart, you use your own words, and preferably in not necessarily in English, whatever language you think in. And for many of you, that happens to be English, but you're not always your matrabhasha, but your main language. So whatever language you think in that language, you share your heart. And the idea here is you develop a more heartfelt connection with Ishvara away from the puja, and then you can carry that with you into the puja. There are many other ways of approaching it, but those are just a couple of ideas. Just one or two more questions and we'll conclude. Yeah, this is a good place to conclude. This is a question from Amit, who lives in India. For many years, I have always listened to knowledge talks, and I presume that means like Vedantic discourses, and I relate to them. But lately I've been listening to talks related to devotion. And he gives the name of a Swami, and a Swami who is encouraging the performance of nama japa, to recite the names of God, chanting the name of God like Radha, Radha, Krishna, Krishna, Hari, Hari, Radha, Radha, etc. And his question is, can we include that as sadhana while we also listen to knowledge talks, Vedantic discourses? Should we chant the name only of our Ishta Devata? Does Nama Japa help to focus the mind, lead us? Here's the relationship between, in fact, it comes back to your question also, relationship between devotional practices and what he calls knowledge talks, Vedantic discourses. Most people, not all, most people would find Advaita Vedanta very dry and unpalatable if it were completely separated, isolated from all devotional practices. It would, look how much logic and reasoning we use in this scripture, that scripture, Shankaracharya's line of thought, etc. It can, you can lose the Sanskrit word is rasa, the essence. Nice word in English, insipid. It becomes insipid. Insipid means no rasa. There's nothing to enjoy. And you very nicely said that Shankaracharya himself wrote many beautiful hymns, which is absolutely true. Shankara, and it's so significant that this great scholar spent a lot of time engaged in devotional practices. Our typical idea of a scholar is not someone who does devotional practices. Shankara is a great example of how the two connect in one person. And it's important because if our spiritual lives become devoid of rasa, so to speak, then it can become dry and insipid. We can lose our enthusiasm for it. We can just let it go, which would be a great shame. So we've already said that devotional practices alone are not sufficient. That's not our discussion right now. But what we could say is, for the vast majority of people, notice I'm making an exception here. For the vast majority of people, Vedantic teachings alone are not enough for almost all people, which means devotional practices are absolutely required. They're important, just for all the reasons I've just said. And I think this would be a good place to conclude today. We'll take more questions next week. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next time.